Welcome to Mindset Tools Mastery. I'm David Phelan. In this presentation, Neutralizing Distressing Memories, I want to help you to manage your memories so your past does not continue to get in the way of what's important to you. If you have any questions that come up, please enter them in the comment section so that I can answer them as we go along or at the end of the recording. So the tool that we're going to be working with is Neutralizing Distressing Memories. And that's a fancy way of saying that it's possible to decrease the emotional intensity of the memories that we have. And before we get started with it, I just want to offer a warning that this presentation is for informational purposes only. It's not intended to be therapy. And you might find some of these exercises or the examples that I use triggering for you. And if that happens, please discontinue watching. If you have a serious reaction, that might be an indication that mental health care is required. And if you find yourself in that situation and you need help, please let us know. So the story that I would like to share with you to begin with is something that happened to me early in my career. I was working as a coordinator of youth ministry at a church, and I had a meeting with the kids that went pretty late. It was about 10 o'clock by the time all the kids went home. And I was putting away the equipment, and I got to the last piece of equipment, and it belonged in the church building itself. And I went over there, and the building was locked. And so I was trying to figure out what to do, and I thought, I could leave this in the building that we were meeting, and I could lock it up there, and it would probably be safe until I got back in the morning. But then I thought, if anybody was looking for this, they would be very concerned that it was missing. So I called the pastor, who was the only one around with the key at the time, and I woke him up, and he was not happy about that. And so I told him what was going on, and he agreed that he was going to come and unlock the door of the church. But in order to do that, he had to get out of bed, which ordinarily wouldn't have been a problem, but sometime before, he had been in an accident and was getting around with a full leg cast. So he had to get out of bed and get dressed with these crutches and this cast. And he was not happy about that. And then he had to hobble downstairs because he lived on the second floor of the rectory, and then he had to hobble across the property to meet me at the door of the church. Needless to say, he was a very unhappy man when he met me there. And he let me know just how unhappy he was. Now, sometimes afterwards, he apologized to me. Told me that I had done the right thing, told me that if it ever happened again, he wanted me to do the same thing. But that did not stop me for about a year afterwards having flashbacks of this man screaming in my face. Now, that continued until I learned what I'm sharing with you right now. And what's really interesting to me about that is not only was I able to neutralize that particular memory, but any time that I want to go back to the intensity of it, I can. It's not that I have forgotten it. It's not that that it's as that it didn't happen. It's just that I have more control over that and what my experience is of it as I recall it. So I want to share with you how I did that. So in order to do this, I'd like you to think about a conflict that you've had with somebody. Preferably one that was face-to-face, not over the phone or social media or texting, something like that, but face-to-face. And as you take a moment to think about that, what we're going to be working with here is demonstrating how the mind actually works, how it represents our memories to us. So take a moment and think about a conflict that you've had with somebody. Okay, now, once you've got that conflict in mind, I'd like you to close your eyes, and I'd like you to bring that conflict to mind in as much detail as you can. Think about where you were, think about what was going on around you at the time, think about who else was there, if anybody else. Try to think about what you were wearing, what the other person was wearing. Try to think about what their face looked like, what their voice sounded like. And as you bring that to mind, I'd like you to think about the intensity. If 0 is not intense at all, 10 is the most intense, where would you rate that level of intensity? Now, as I'm doing this work with clients, oftentimes they're talking about situations where the intensity was above a 5. And if you're above a 5, then you know how distressing that can be. Okay, but even if the intensity as you think about it is lower, that's okay, we can still work with it. So now what I'd like you to do is to take that same image of the conflict with that person and see if you can make it smaller. See if you can shrink it down to about the size of a postage stamp that's on the ground as you're standing up over it. If you can do that, then rate the intensity again. Is the intensity about the same? Is it less intense? Is it more intense? If you're like most of the clients that I work with, as you made the image smaller, it made it less intense. Now, if that wasn't your experience, that's okay. I'll show you what to do with that. For some people, it doesn't change the intensity at all. For some people, it makes it more intense. Okay? And again, if that's true for you, that's okay. We'll talk about that in a moment. But for most people, when you take an image like that, it makes it smaller. When you make it smaller, it makes it less intense. And so I want you to think about what that means. Have you ever heard the expression, you're blowing that out of proportion? Right? When somebody uses that expression, what they're saying is somebody has taken something that's not all that significant and they've made it much more important than it really is. And how that happened was literally making the picture larger in their mind. For most people, if you take an image and you make it larger in your mind, it's going to make it feel more intense. And the converse is true as well, which you may have just experienced. If you make the image smaller, it makes it less intense. And that is going to be true whether we're talking about a pleasant memory, like a vacation, or an unpleasant memory, like the conflict that we were just working with. And so how the mind represents things to itself is important in terms of how we end up feeling. And so I want to give you some other examples of how the mind represents our memories to us. So take that same image and close your eyes again and put it back the way that it was originally. And now I want you to notice whether the image is more like a still photo or more like a movie. If it's a still photo, I'd like you to see then if you can make it more like a movie. If it was a movie, see if you can make it more like a still photo. And again, just notice, one, if you can do that. Some people, as they work with this, they find it difficult to do. And again, if you find it difficult, that's okay. But if you're able to do it, just notice the intensity. When you change it from a still photo to a movie or from a movie to a still photo, does it change the intensity? More intense, less intense, or no change? Okay, now put it back the way that it was originally. And now I want you to imagine that you are looking through the lens of a camera. And you could turn the lens and make it out of focus. Make it very out of focus. If you can do that, notice if it changes the intensity. More intense, less intense, or no change. Okay, now put it back the way that it was originally. And this time I want you to notice the brightness of the picture. I want you to imagine that you had a dimmer switch and you could turn down the brightness. And again, notice if that changes the intensity. More intense, less intense, or no change. And again, put it back the way that it was originally. And now I want you to notice whether it's more like you're in the picture, seeing things through your own eyes, or is it more like you're out of the picture, watching yourself? If you're in the picture, I want you to try stepping out of the picture. And if you are watching yourself, I want you to try step in the picture. And again, notice if it changes the intensity. More intense, less intense, or no change. And put it back to the way that it was originally. Now I want you to notice where the image is in your field of vision. Is it in the center of your field of vision? Is it up or down? Then notice, is it left or right? Try moving the picture around your field of vision. Up left, up center, up right, down center, down left, down right, center left, center right. Try moving it all around your field of vision and notice where it's the most intense and where it's the least intense. And again, put it back the way that it was originally. And this time I want you to notice whether it's more like the image is color or more like it's black and white. And again, try switching it. If it was color, make it black and white. If it's black and white, make it color. And just notice again if there's a change in the intensity. And now I want you to notice whether there is a border around the image or if the edges just kind of stretch out to infinity. If they just stretch out, try making a border around it. And if there is a border, try imagining there was no border. You can also try changing the shape of the border. It might be a square or a rectangle, but you could make it a circle or a triangle. And just notice as you do those if it changes the intensity. And again, where is it the most intense and where is it the least intense? And put it back the way that it was originally. And now I want you to think about the sound of the picture. And imagine that you had a volume control and you could turn the volume down. Does that make it more intense, less intense, or no change? And put it back the way that it was originally. And now I want you to imagine adding your favorite music to the background. More intense, less intense, or no change? How about turning up the volume of the music? Does that change the intensity? Okay, now get rid of the music, and this time I want you to think about the other person saying the exact same thing they were saying to you, but saying it in Donald Duck's voice. And notice if that changes the intensity. And put it back the way that it was originally. Now I want you to think about the temperature of the picture. Imagine that it was a lot warmer or hot. Notice if that changes the intensity. And put it back the way that it was originally. And this time I want you to imagine a clean, fresh breeze blowing through the picture. And imagine taking a nice deep breath of that. And notice if that changes the intensity. More intense, less intense, or no change. Okay, great. Now put it back the way that it was originally and open your eyes. Does it make sense to you that every memory that we have is going to be based on one or more of the five senses? So in this exercise, we were going through each of the five senses. We started with the visual, and then we did the auditory, and then we did the kinesthetic with the sense of temperature, and we did the olfactory with the clean, fresh breeze. We didn't do the gustatory sense or the sense of taste, but you've probably heard people say things like, that left a bitter taste in my mouth, right? So the idea is that as we change the representations of the sensory information, it changes the way that it feels. So in this work, some authors refer to the five senses as modes, and the components within each of the five senses as submodalities. So size is a submodality of the visual mode. Volume is a submodality of the auditory mode. And the way that it works, again, is as we change the submodalities, it changes the way that it feels. So think about a movie director. And imagine that a movie director wants to make a scary scene, right? what do they tend to do with the lighting? Well, they'll often make it darker. And what do they tend to do with the music? Oftentimes they add tension to the music. Now, if the director wants to make a romantic scene, they may keep the lighting at about the same level, but the music becomes much more rolling. Okay, now, if you've ever seen a spoof movie, they'll mess with that. They'll show the monster and they'll put a love song underneath it. Or they'll show a love song scene and they'll put the theme song to Jaws underneath it, right? And we laugh at that because we're not expecting it. So what I want you to think about is that you are the director of the scenes that are playing in your head, and you can do anything that you want with them. Right now, so think about these submodalities, kind of like a soundboard. If you've ever seen somebody operate a soundboard, it has all those different levers on it, right? And so what we're saying is that as we change the submodalities, as we move those levers around, we can create different feelings, right? So you can take a task that you are not particularly motivated to do, like say, do the dishes. And what we're saying is, if you can get the size of the image to the right level, the brightness, the clarity, the volume, you can create a sense of motivation about something that you were previously unmotivated about. I've often used this particular strategy when working with students and doing their homework, right? I'll ask them to notice how they're representing the picture of doing their homework to themselves. And then we'll go through the submodalities and I'll make a list of what they're telling me, how they're representing it. And then I'll ask them to change the submodalities, like go in the opposite direction, and then notice how that feels. And oftentimes they'll report that it feels different, like they feel more motivated. And sometimes it can just be like one or two of the submodalities that makes a huge difference. Like sometimes I've worked with people who are anxious about taking a test, and what they realize is that the picture that they are making of taking the test in their head is huge, right? And then as soon as they shrink it down, it makes it feel much less intense, much less anxious. Okay, so we're able to change how we represent things, which changes the way that we feel. Now, if you understand that how the mind works, you can use that to your advantage. And in Memory Magic Part 1, we talked about that, and we talked about applying that to pleasant memories. And the idea with that is that as we polish up the pleasant memories, making them, for many people, as they make them clearer and brighter, it makes that feel more intense, and they can get that feeling right now. So if it's a feeling of confidence, they can help themselves to feel more confident right now by using those pleasant memories. Right? So if we know how it works, then we can use that to our advantage. Okay? And we're going to talk in a moment about being able to apply this to unpleasant memories. Before we go on to that, let me just mention that what typically happens as I'm working with clients, is that we notice that one mode, one of the sensory representations, is going to be more prominent for them than others. So they might be more visual or more auditory. Now, you've probably heard things like, well, I'm a visual learner. We're not talking about learning style. We're talking about a reacting style, okay? And so an example of this was, and by the way, so something like 70 to 80% of people are either going to be visual or auditory, and the remainder get divided between the other three modes. And this came up one time when I was working with a woman, and her goal was to get in better shape. And she really liked to hike, and she had moved to a new home that was right at the base of this mountain, and she wanted to be able to climb the mountain, but she wasn't able to get herself to do it, even though hiking was something that she really enjoyed. And so I worked with a lot of the ideas that I've shared in other presentations, and nothing was working with her. And then she said something in one of our sessions that made me think that perhaps she was kinesthetic. And so I asked her to think about what it was like when she imagined herself hiking. And immediately she locked onto, I can feel the scrub brush grabbing at my ankles, and I don't like that. And as soon as she said that, then I recognized, yep, that's what we were talking about. She's in the kinesthetic mode. And so then I asked her to imagine like the rhythm of the hiking. And as soon as she was able to lock into that, she said, oh, that feels great. And she never missed a day of hiking after that, right? So there are a number of different ways that we can use submodalities and use how our mind works. Now we want to apply that to being able to decrease the intensity of unpleasant memories. One way that you could do that is you could think about the unpleasant memories and you could just mess with the submodalities. You could make it smaller versus larger. You could change it from color to black and white and that kind of thing. But there's a way to speed up the process. And it's an exercise that I call and that some other authors call smashing pictures. So I'm going to describe it to you, and then we're going to do it together. So in this exercise, I'm going to ask you to imagine the conflict as if it were etched on a pane of glass. And then I'm going to count to 3, and then you're going to imagine swinging the bat and smashing the glass into a million pieces. At the same time you swing, we're both going to say the word whoosh out loud. So it's going to sound like this. 1, 2, 3, whoosh. Okay, now the object of this exercise is to be able to reduce the emotional intensity of the image. Okay, now recall the conflict that you had thought of earlier. And as you bring that to mind, just notice the intensity. If there's still some intensity there, as you make it the way that you made it originally, we can work with that. And if that's already neutralized, if it's already at 0, you might want to think of another memory that you would like to neutralize. So I'll give you a moment again to bring a memory to mind that you'd like to work with. Okay, now close your eyes and bring that memory to mind in as much detail as you can. And now I want you to imagine that image as if it were etched on glass. And now imagine holding a baseball bat. Notice the weight of the bat. Notice the texture of the grip as you hold it. Feel the tension in your arms and across your chest, and get ready to swing. 1, 2, 3, whoosh, and open your eyes. And now think about what happened. Did the image break? If not, that's okay. We'll just keep working with it. Let's do it again. Close your eyes and make the picture as if it were etched on glass, and get ready to swing. 1, 2, 3, whoosh. Open your eyes. And now I want you to say out loud the name of your 3rd grade teacher. If you can't remember it, that's okay. Close your eyes again. Make the picture again. 1, 2, 3, whoosh. Open your eyes. Now name 3 U.S. presidents. And again, if you can't think of them, that's okay. Close your eyes. Make the picture again. 1, 2, 3, whoosh. Open your eyes, close your eyes. 1, 2, 3, whoosh. Open your eyes, close your eyes. 1, 2, 3, whoosh. Open your eyes, close your eyes. And think about what happens. Now, you'll know this exercise is working when one of 3 things happens. Either you can't make the picture, or as soon as you make the picture, it explodes, or all you get is the whoosh. If any one of those 3 things is happening, this exercise is working. And once again, if you have trouble with this kind of visualization and you're getting stuck, that's okay. Just let us know and I can help you to work through that. Now, if you were able to get the image to smash, then I want you to make the image again and rate the intensity. Okay? And just notice if the intensity is lower than when you started. If you've tried to smash this image and you found it difficult, You can try using a different image, or if you smashed it and it didn't reduce in intensity, you can try it with the same exercise with a different image. If you've tried it with a couple of images and you don't seem to be getting anywhere, again, feel free to reach out and I can help you with that. Okay, so if you were able to smash it and you did notice that the intensity is being reduced, you're getting closer to zero, then you're on the right track. Now, what's the goal? The goal is to get it all the way to zero. And why do I say that? There's a house that's at 3818 West Shell Drive in Phoenix that you never think about. Is that a true statement? Does it make sense that even if you had driven by that house at some point in your life, you probably would still not think about it? And why wouldn't you think about it? Because your emotional connection to that house is zero. You don't know who lives there. Okay? But for me, that was the house that I grew up in. So from time to time, I'll think about it because my emotional connection is not at zero. Right? So as we work with images, when we get them to zero, when we neutralize the intensity, then it's not going to come up for us anymore. There's a difference between trying not to think of something and it just not coming up. So oftentimes I'll think about distressing recollections as a tiger that is trying to attack us. And if you can get the tiger into a box and you can keep a lid on it, then the tiger isn't able to hurt you. But the problem is, as soon as your attention, as soon as your effort or energy is required for something else, then the lid comes off and the tiger is able to attack you. But imagine that you gave the tiger a tranquilizer. It wouldn't matter whether it was in the box or not in the box. And that's what we're doing with this exercise when we're able to get it all the way to zero. Have you ever been at a store and been looking at picture frames? And in that picture frame, there might be a picture of a person or a family, right? And you don't have any particular reaction because you don't know those people. Well, when we're working with neutralizing distressing recollections, that's what we are talking about, is that it's possible to get to the point where we're able to think about that image, but there's just no emotional intensity about it. So this is similar to an experience that I had when I was in high school. I was working on the set of a play and I was carving large blocks of styrofoam with a machete. And at one point, the styrofoam broke and I ended up cutting my hand. And I had to go to the hospital and get it stitched up. And I get released from the hospital or urgent care. And I'm trying to figure out what to do. Well, all of my friends were still working on the set of the play. So where do you think I went? Back to where my friends were, right? And I wanted to help, but I couldn't for two reasons. One is that my hand hurt like heck, and two, it was all stitched up and bandaged up. I didn't have the use of my hand. Now, more than 20 years later, right, my hand is completely healed, okay? And because it's completely healed, there's no more pain and there's no more impairment. Imagine if it hadn't completely healed. Imagine that there were still, from time to time, twinges of pain. Imagine that I pick up my coffee cup, ow, that hurts, and I drop it. Okay, that pain would lead to impairment. But because it's healed, there's no pain and there's no impairment. Now, that doesn't mean that I have forgotten what's happened, right? I can tell the story the way that I am now. My daughter says, hey, Dad, how did you get that scar? I can tell her the story of what happened. I haven't forgotten. It's just that because there's no pain, there's no impairment. And I'm suggesting the same thing can happen with our emotional wounds, that we can get to the point where the pain is neutralized and we won't have forgotten. It just won't get in the way anymore. And for the most part, we won't think about it. It just won't come up. Just like that house that's at 3818 West Shore Drive just doesn't come up in your thinking because there is no emotional connection to it. So our goal is to get to 0. But what if you're not there yet? So first of all, I'd like to suggest to you that this exercise can't not work, right? Another way of saying that is it has to work. And why would I say that? Because if you think about what we're talking about, it's basic neurology, right? Where are our memories stored, right? It's not stored in our big toe, right? It's stored in our brain. And what's your brain comprised of? About 80 billion brain cells, right? And at any given moment, those brain cells are either on or off. That's all they do. So one way to think about the recollection, the image, is it's a particular pattern of those brain cells being on and off. And then you've got a second pattern of on and offs, that's the feeling. And then you've got a third pattern that connects that image with that feeling. What we're doing in this exercise is we're messing with that third pattern, the connecting pattern. Make the picture, break the picture, think of something random. Make the picture, break the picture, think of something random. If you do that enough, you'll still have the image. You'll still have the ability to create that same feeling, that same level of feeling, that same intensity, but it's just that those things won't be connected anymore. Okay? So what that means is if you're not at 0 yet, but you know this exercise has to work, then you can do one of two things. One is that you can increase the number of repetitions. So some images you may be able to neutralize the first time you smash them. Some may take 10 times, some may take 100 times, but if you know that it's going to work, just keep going until you get there. The second thing that you can do is you can make your whoosh louder. Now, why would I say that? I'm going to say two things out loud, and I want you to think about which one sounds more intense. If I were to say, help, or if I were to say, help, right? The second one sounds more intense. Why? It's louder. Loud things tend to be dangerous. And so our nervous system is going to pay attention to those things, right? If there was a loud noise that none of us expected right now, we'd all jump, right? Our brain and our nervous system was already hardwired to equate volume with seriousness or importance. So again, if we know that, we can use that to our advantage. So you may have watched a sporting event where you'll see the team do a cheer right before the event, right? Why are they screaming it rather than whispering it? They're using that same principle, right? It's energizing. And so if we know that, we can use that to our advantage. Now, as you are working on neutralizing distressing recollections, you may notice a few things. One is that as you start rummaging around in your memory for images to smash, you might think of things that you hadn't thought of in a while. And you might have the sense of, oh no, this is getting worse, right? That's okay. Just smash those ones also. What happens more often than that, though, is that as you neutralize some recollections, you may find that there's a multiplying effect, that it starts to neutralize other ones. It's very uncommon for me to be working with somebody and not have that multiplying effect start to happen. So, but even if it didn't for you, you have a finite number of negative memories, and probably the ones that are distressing to you are even fewer than that, right? So if you had to go through and neutralize them one by one, you could. Okay, now, you may also notice that if you get a memory all the way to 0, you might notice that a few days later it starts to creep back up again. And that's okay, just smash it some more. Eventually it will get to 0 and it will stay there until you might choose to make it more intense, right? And again, sometimes I just play around with memories to demonstrate to myself once again the kind of control that I have over it. But you can get it to 0 and have it not move unless you make it move. A couple other things that you might notice is that images that are more recent with people that you care about or that were more intense to begin with, you might find more difficult to smash. And if you do, that's okay. Sometimes I'm working with someone and they'll present a particular recollection and they find that they're not really getting anywhere. And we just pause with that one and we go on and to work on another one. And after they make some progress with other recollections, they find it easier to come back to that one. And so if you think about it, what we're doing is really we are training your mind, right? So there's an advantage to you being able to neutralize a distressing recollection. And that's like one level of benefit. But at an even deeper level, you're training your mind. And when your mind really gets how this works, you will change the way that you make memories going into the future. In the future, what will happen is you'll have a distressing event. There'll be the recollection, the images of that, and there'll be the feelings of that, but those won't get connected very strongly. On the other hand, you'll have a pleasant event, and the image and the feeling will get super glued together because that's what serves us. Okay? So I encourage you to play around with this exercise, and if you find that it is difficult, again, feel free to reach out. And I also want to suggest that smashing pictures is one metaphor for neutralizing distressing recollections, but there's others. And I'm just going to mention a few. There's a sandcastle, there's a chalk drawing, tearing pieces of paper, burning the image, paintballing the image, machine gun, or bombing it with a nuclear warhead, okay? So lots of different metaphors that we can use. And I'm just going to suggest walk through the first one with you so you get an idea of this. But when I first learned this, I learned about smashing pictures. But because I understood how submodalities worked, I was able to come up with all of these other metaphors. So I want to suggest one to you, but then you can work with developing your own. So close your eyes again and think about that image that you're working with. And again, if you were able to get that all the way to 0, it's okay if you work with a different image. And this time I want you to imagine that it was like a sand castle on the edge of the ocean. And I want you to imagine that a wave comes in and takes part of that sand sculpture back out to sea with it. And then another wave comes in and takes part of that sand sculpture back out to sea. And another wave, and another wave. And keep watching it until the image is completely washed away. One of the things that you might notice with that is it's a more gentle image than smashing is. I remember the first time I was teaching this was in a workshop, and I hadn't created as many distinctions. And so when I first started, I just asked the participants to think of an unpleasant memory. Right now, I had in my mind like a conflict, and we worked on smashing it. And then a woman came up to me after the workshop and she said, you know, what that came to mind was her right before she died, and how, you know, distressing that was for me. And I really felt bad when this woman was telling me what it had been like for her. And so I helped her with that. But, you know, I recognized that I needed gentler metaphors. And so the sand sculpture is one that can be helpful, as well as some of the other ones. So if you want to find out about the other metaphors, again, feel free to reach out. Now, these exercises, neutralizing distressing recollections that we worked with so far, are sensory based, right? They're based on the 5 senses. But sometimes what is bothersome to us about distressing memories is not the sensory presentation, but how our thinking has changed. And so we might have negative self-talk that has developed. So sometimes when my clients have gone through some kind of trauma or abuse, they might end up thinking things like, you know, I'm not worth anything, or I'm a piece of garbage, or things like that. And there may not necessarily be an image that goes along with that. So there are also strategies that we can use to change the language-based representations of what happened. And this is work that I do in what I call trauma timeline work. And there's a series of questions that help us to develop an understanding of what happened and what our reaction was, how our thinking with that shifted. And so we can see that the event sets up patterns of thinking and feeling and behavior that may initially have been protective to us. Our mind's primary job is to keep us safe. And so we can make an adjustment like, if we're hurt by somebody, it's not safe for me to be vulnerable, right? Be protective. And that initially, that it keeps us safe. If we're around a person who has the potential to harm us and we don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we won't get harmed. But the problem is that over time, the thing that initially kept us safe can keep us stuck. And so you may have heard me use this example before, but if you're walking down the street and you get to an intersection and you step off the curb and you get hit by a car, that's going to be a very distressing event. And the next time that you get to that intersection, everything inside you should scream, don't step off the curb. If there's a car coming, that will keep you safe. But if there's no car coming, that same thing will keep you stuck. So it can be helpful for us to work through the changes that occurred in our thinking as a result of that distressing situation, to see how that thinking is getting in the way of things for now. And once we are aware of it, then we can make adjustments. Now, as I'm doing that work, I will often end with a visualized, empowered reenactment, at which time we are using the submodalities and how the mind represents it. But I use that at the end of going through those questions. So if you want to learn more about those strategies, the questions that I go through with people, I'd be happy to share that with you. So if there are any questions that any of you have right now, I'd be happy to address those, and you can just put them in the comments section, and I'll give you a few moments to think about that. Okay, great. I want you to know that it really has been a pleasure to share these ideas with you. And if you have found that this was helpful, know that my goal is to share these ideas with as many people as I can. And so if you could just ask yourself, are there one or two other people that you know who might benefit from this? And if there is, would you be willing to share our Facebook page or our YouTube channel with them? If you could, that would be helpful. Also, if you wouldn't mind liking our Transcend Personal Development Facebook page and follow us on YouTube, that also is very helpful. And finally, if you're not currently working with me, but you would like to, please send me a message here on Facebook, or you can visit my website, davidphelan.net, and click on the client inquiries form link, and you can fill out your information about what you're looking for, and we'll be glad to get back to you. So blessings until next time.